Hello, I'm your host Eloisa Marquez Gonzalez, and this is Roots of Sustainable Impact. For today's episode, we are going to be talking about ESG programs. And for that, I have my guest, Rebecca Lehman. She is a Senior Manager of Social Impact and ESG at DroneDeploy. Hello, Rebecca. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Eloisa. Thank you so much for having me here.
So for those in our audience that have not yet met you, could you give a quick introduction about yourself and the type of impact that you are trying to live on this world?
So my background is, I guess I should stop doing the guess. Okay. My background is in biology and ecology. And from that, I started kind of seeing this intersection between environmental work and technology, and all of the ways that technology can help us with that and many other of the kind of substantial challenges that our world faces, be them social, environmental, or community driven. And so I've been, I guess, for the past 5 years or so, working at geospatial software companies or companies that are using some sort of mapping or technology that is based on that to make an impact and supported different nonprofit programs. And currently I work at DroneDeploy. It's a reality capture software, and I support their social impact program as well as their environmental, social, and governance work. So both the internal and kind of the product side of how we're making an impact there.
Wonderful. And so to level set everyone that is listening today, let's start by defining what's an ESG program, because there's so many different definitions out there. So I would love to hear what does that mean for you and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, for us, it's just really a framework that helps manage risk and helps us drive purpose-driven growth. So that's about just driving that to deliver long-term value to our stakeholders. Those include our board members, our customers, our employees, and then kind of the broader community at large. So we divide that into 3 sections there. Environmental, so that would be, increasing operational efficiency for the company, our compliance work, and then environmental responsibility. For social, that can include diversity, equity, and inclusion, company culture, responsible technology, with a goal of maintaining and attracting talent and building ethical operations. And then under governance, for us, it's ethics, compliance, cybersecurity, and data protection, the board effectiveness, financial performance, and that's all about building trust with our customers, our investors, and kind of building that foundation for long-term growth.
Right, and what you mentioned, many different stakeholders, and for some of the smaller organizations, they are thinking of starting their ESG program as you have defined it. Might sound a little bit overwhelming, saying, how am I going to engage all these stakeholders? Yeah. Is there any tactics or strategies that you have found more useful when you're saying, okay, we gotta first prioritize our stakeholders and then reach out to them as an organization? Are there any better ways that you have found to reach out to these stakeholders?
So we are a private company still. We are a startup. So that means that the main stakeholder for us is the folks that have invested in this company. And that's, different venture capital firms. So I'd say that's a large stakeholder for us because they have a big chunk of this business that they've invested in and want to see that growth long term. And then I'd say that looks different for different types of companies. If you are kind of self-funded, maybe it's more about your customers, and then if you're a public company, you do have a lot more reporting requirements as well. So for us, this program is I'd say one of the big stakeholders is our investors and our board. And then whatever your board looks like, that kind of can drive those stakeholders, like defining them. But we also don't want to forget kind of the communities we work in, and all of the different kind of more far-reaching impacts our business has. So that's kind of where you do need that kind of nuance of, if you actually have a structure or you're doing manufacturing somewhere, then that stakeholder map looks a lot different. But there's a lot of tools out there to help kind of create that stakeholder map and define what your program's for and who needs to be invested, and getting those updates from you on it, and in shaping the path of your program.
And you mentioned something that caught my eye in the sharing those updates. How is that conversation with your investors, or how do you maintain the cadence for those main stakeholders? It doesn't have to be the investors, but with your main stakeholders, how do you make sure that it's in a cadence that they are feeling heard? Are you reporting back to them? And I know there's these specific reporting frameworks, but reporting back to your stakeholders, making sure they know what is happening in their program, in their investment, I guess.
Yeah, so internally we meet each quarter with a team that's kind of cross-sectional across the company, and talk about the projects we're working on, bring in guest speakers, and keep updated that way. And then we do get requests in from some of our VC firms that ask for the data that's related to our ESG work. So that's the main way that folks are updated on that. And then we also sometimes are doing kind of board readouts where it's sharing about the program and updates from that.
Wonderful.
And we're definitely seeing a trend of more interest from those VC firms to get that ESG data. There's a couple different frameworks that have come up around that, that just ask for reporting on your environmental work, your employee data, and then governance practices as well. And so then that gives us some sort of benchmarking within those tools that we can use to kind of create the plan moving forward to move up on those benchmarks.
And on those metrics that you have created, the benchmarks, you mentioned there's, the cross-functional teams, and you might be looking at the environmental impact. And I imagine folks from the different disciplines are looking at, they have interest in different metrics. How is a conversation trying to get down to what are the key metrics? Because you could measure so many different things. However, there's the ones that they're going to really show the impact that you're having. How is that? How does that conversation come along on defining your metrics?
So for the requests from investors, we actually just get a list of questions and then we just fill those out. Yeah. I'd say the more kind of nuanced, metric setting is around our impact work. So that's like our product donations, the organizations that we're working with in disaster response, nonprofits, and as well as universities and education institutions. And that's a little bit more of a vague area of how you're going to define impact. Some people are looking at the number of lives impacted, the number of users you have on your platform, the number of dollars you've donated. And so we've kind of taken a cross-cut of some of those to try and get at both, not just how much we're giving out in terms of product, but also how much it's being utilized. So for us, we have a software that is doing reality capture. So video, image capture with drones, robots, and cameras. And so we can look at how many images have been uploaded onto our platform and kind of use that as a metric for kind of the general usage and the impact that we're having through our product.
Wonderful.
So it's going to be different for different organizations for sure.
Correct. So you look at it more from the organization that you're supporting. What can we measure? when looking at the work that they are doing and how our product is being utilized?
Yeah, so if an organization is using our product, we can actually take a look at the utilization metrics from that, and that's where we get that photo number.
Wonderful. And I saw that the organization encourages folks to give about 1% of their time to different causes.
Yeah, so we're as a company a part of the Pledge 1% program, which is about the company as a whole donating 1% of its time, people, resources, product to the greater good. And through that, there's a kind of child program called We Pledge 1%. That's just kind of pushing that a little further and saying, how can each of us kind of take that on internally? And so that's a program that we do have at the company. It's just kind of a framework for our volunteer and giving program that encourages folks to look at how they want to give back in their lives. And if there's a way that that does integrate with their work, then that's awesome. And if not, that's okay too. We kind of leave it quite open-ended and just kind of an optional, kind of like you think of other employee benefits. It's something people can take advantage of if they'd like to.
Wonderful. And if someone says, okay, that program sounds great, like how do I get started something like that in my organization? Can folks start that conversation on something similar of pledging, having their employees pledge 1% of their time or support to other organizations? How can that conversation get started?
It can start in different ways. Sometimes it's HR that's driving an initiative like that, and sometimes it's ERGs or employee resource groups. And there can be different ways that employees themselves are really interested in a certain cause or in giving back. There are also different platforms that can make that easier. So for us, we use a platform called Millie, and that allows employees to make donations anywhere in the world, track their volunteering hours, and for us to kind of have this virtual hub for the program. And another thing that you can look to instill is a volunteer time off policy. So we have 20 hours of volunteer time off a year, and just kind of having that as either a policy or a program or an option for an employees, whichever is kind of easiest to work through, can also be a way of kind of showing that the company itself is supporting this initiative and backing it.
Wonderful. So that way everyone can start even giving time back, even if it's not in a monetary or product donation. Organizations could start thinking of how they can start embedding that culture, because it's a cultural thing where people see it normal. It's part of being an employee doing.
Yeah, definitely, Eloisa. And one thing that can be really beneficial for building that culture is to have those type of events at your company. Employee, when you have a big company meeting or a kickback where you're all getting together in person, that's a great place to kind of instill that further in culture. One thing we've tried to do is a different volunteer-led program at each of our larger corporate events where everybody's getting together. And so we built robots for a STEAM program, a Boys and Girls Club, and that was really fun. Or donated backpacks or something like that.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Both the building robots and coming up with backpacks. And
definitely.
So now building this type of programs, again, as we just said, is cultural and is building that culture. Now, as small organizations are trying to scale, what do you see? How do you see them balancing their need to have an ESG impact with their need of scaling? Because there's two forces that are pulling a lot of their resources in different directions. How can we align them to pull into the same direction, allow the organization have a bigger impact?
I'd say that a lot of the kind of work that ESG programs are taking on is things that fall through the crack in other departments because it is too cross sectional of a issue to really be just one department's project. And a lot of the work is putting structures in place so that you are able to scale. So, for example, like having a anti-slavery policy is anti-modern day slavery policy is not something that's like top of mind for small organizations. It's not like an issue that comes up often. But if you're applying for big, RFPs from a large company that's international, they'll want to see that type of a policy in place. And so you've already saved yourself the work of getting that done. And same with something like other responsible technology policies that are kind of saving you a headache down the road if you put in the right, the right steps to build your technology in an ethical way from the start. There is kind of a lot that can be done. So there is kind of, especially if you're at a small organization, some work to do to really prioritize the areas that are going to make the most impact and focus on those rather than kind of just trying to boil the ocean of all the different ways you can be more environmentally friendly or more socially conscious as a company.
Correct. And what I tell my clients, it's being intentional. As you're building one structure, be intentional and say, okay, I'm already building this structure. So how can we measure and make sure that we have the right impacts in place? And to your point, it's like, what policies do we need to have around them? And that's the moment to start building them or start the foundational work. You might not finish the whole policy, but you start that foundational work. Because, yes, if you want to retrofit or like come back and build those policies later on whenever you're asked by a client, then that is when there's a lot of work and a lot of gaps to be filled. So
definitely.
Wonderful. And all right. And so in general, any other challenges that you see or opportunities for small organizations to say, yes, I should actually start structuring my ESG program now and not wait for someone to ask me? Any challenges or opportunities that you see for them?
Yeah, I'd say, it doesn't have to be a lot. Like any program that you're starting at a small organization, it doesn't have to be a full-time job for somebody. It can just be folks coming together around some issues that they're seeing and kind of seeing this as a good framework for handling those. So that's been a really beneficial way to look at this. And then also, obviously, having engagement from your C-suite, from your leadership, and kind of having the usefulness of a program like this really understood at that level is really important for growing as well.
That is critical. I love it because that usefulness is part of how do you show them what is in for me, to make sure that they actually adopt the programs. It's not about telling them this is a program you should take on, but get them involved in the creation of it. Wonderful, wonderful. And so, Rebecca, if we have someone that is saying, well, I want to get started, I'm a startup, what are the first steps that you would suggest for them to get started on their ESG journey? So
yeah, I'd say depending on who you are at that company, it'd be making a case for doing some sort of a risk assessment or a materiality assessment, and then having that kind of as a mandate or a request come from somebody in leadership, that they're excited and they want to see the results of that, and that you should go about creating that.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting started on that and kind of showing the results and finding what the risks are. I think that's a really important first step. And I share that, it's helpful to have that come, I guess, somewhat from the top, because I've been in other organizations where I've seen the grassroots approach not work as well, because there's so many different stakeholders that need to be involved, and there can be kind of some more long-term projects that it is really helpful to kind of be at least at a starting place from the leadership level, and then kind of working from there. But yeah, the materiality assessment, risk assessment, there's so many different models for that. But just finding one that works for your company and can help kind of illustrate what the risks are. And then once you can kind of see that visually, I think it's a lot easier to move forward with the program.
And two questions out of that. Materiality assessment, you mentioned a couple of times. There are folks in our audience who are not familiar with materiality assessment. I think the risk assessment is more well known, but the materiality assessment, could you describe it for us?
Yeah, so that's usually more focused on kind of your environmental impact. So it's creating kind of a baseline for all of your environmental policies and what assets you have and how much energy you're using. And then, there's kind of some more different metrics that are baked into that as well. There's a lot of different materiality assessment, ESG risk assessment tools out there. One that we're seeing a lot is a ESG VC tool that kind of can give you a score. And then there's more global ones like the Global Reporting Initiative Standards, or the SASB Materiality Map, or the Carbon Disclosure Project, or Deloitte has a tool. The UN SDGs is one that we see people mapping to as well. So I think it's a question of working with your stakeholders to see which one is going to best align with their interests, or kind of what they're looking for you to be reporting on, to make, just create one that's going to work for the short term, and not overly, especially if you are a startup. I think that VC one's great, but in general, just not overly getting into the weeds on reporting if you don't have to, because it can be a lot of work.
Correct. You want to balance that, especially at the beginning. You want to balance the what you can do with all the different frameworks, because yes, there's so many. You already mentioned a whole list, which we will put the links on the show notes to make sure folks can find them and can explore and see, as you said, which one works for where they are today. They want to make sure that they select something that is not for a more mature organization, and then they get overwhelmed and they drop it, because we want every organization to get started on this work, because we need it as a planet. So we'll put
Definitely.
those.
And that's kind of a great point. It's just like, start wherever you are and don't be too intimidated by all the different ways that people do it, and just whatever works best for your organization.
Yes. And you also, earlier you mentioned about making those results visual for your stakeholders, for your leadership. Is there anything that you have found more useful that folks have liked? If it's like, I don't know, infographics or ways of the storytelling, how do you make things visual to get that buy-in?
Yeah, so one of our VC firms is called Energize Capital, and they helped us a lot with that first risk assessment. And I think one thing that's helpful is just seeing that red or the green on the different issues that you're working on, because it's, just an easier way of communicating that. And then another tool we have for kind of that visual storytelling is our impact report each year. So that shares a lot more kind of storytelling as well as kind of graphics or numbers about our program, and is a really nice kind of leave behind with different with different folks to better understand our program.
Okay. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing all this knowledge and all this information applications. I'm sure our listeners are getting a lot of good stuff out of this conversation. Any last comments for our audience regarding ESG programs, how to build one?
I mean, I'm happy to chat with anybody who's interested. Oftentimes, just kind of those conversations with other folks doing similar work at different companies can be super helpful. So I'm available on LinkedIn and wherever to kind of have that conversation. And then I'd say another thing that's been interesting is kind of looking at what your customers are doing. Sometimes your customers are probably bigger companies than yours. Or maybe it is kind of a consumer goods and you want to look at who's buying your product, and just seeing what this looks like for them, and how you can collaborate on some projects. Maybe for us, it's often on the sustainability lens. Maybe there's some social projects where you can kind of collaborate and make this program a little more sticky.
Yes, collaboration is key in everything we do in the climate critical space. Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. And now we move into the last question. It's a fun one. Well, I think it's fun. If there was one person you could meet, who would that be and why?
I would meet Oprah Winfrey. I used to watch her show every day after school in middle school, and she just has the best conversation. So I would really enjoy chatting with her and learning about her life a little more.
Wonderful. Well, Oprah, if you're listening, reach out to Rebecca. So, well, it was a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you very much for coming on the show. And if someone wants to reach out to you, what are the best ways to get hold of you? You mentioned LinkedIn. Any other way, or is LinkedIn the best?
Yeah, we also have a website for our program at DroneDeploy.org. So you can learn about new events coming up and more ways that our company is working there. So
wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. And folks, thank you for listening, and I will see you next week. Have a good
Thank you so much, Eloisa. Have a great time. Thank you so much, Eloisa, for having me. This was a really fun conversation.